Warning, this build is incredibly fun and clearing screens with just the press of a single button. Hey, I'm Cyclone, and today I want to share with you my triple stat stacking Invoker variant using Tempest Flurry to have a near Autobomber playstyle experience. Now I say near because we need to use a second button for tanky rares and big pinnacle bosses. We use 2 additional buttons. So really it just nukes almost everything. If you have seen my Gemling Legionnaire variant, it has everything that the Gemling Legionnaire variant has, but better. So before we're going to get into the details, very quickly there will be a written guide, and we'll link it in the pinned comment in the description. It has all the details needed, what item stats, what passive nodes, what skill gem setups, what to 5-link, what to 6-link, quality, everything is in there. If anything is unclear from there or in this video, feel free to ask in the comment section or on Discord in the designated channel or via DMs. I will try to answer as quickly as possible. Now, what we'll be covering in this video that you should watch on top of just reading the written guide. First, why Invoker over Gemling Legionnaire? What does the Sensei have that is better? Second, why Tempest Flurry works as an auto-bombing playstyle. Third, the double Herald setup. And finally, how this build achieves a very high survivability without needing very expensive chase uniques. So, starting with number 1. Why am I not using Gemling Legionnaire anymore? Why did I swap to an Invoker? The reason for that is the Gemling Legionnaire felt really satisfying to play, but it had some issues with amount of skills used and with survivability. Well, it had 3k life, and technically if you get a super expensive setup with 5k mana, 6k mana, and you get Mind Over Matter, it has incredibly survivability, kind of. It didn't felt that great, and sometimes it just got one shot. Or maybe you didn't got one shot, but now you don't have the mana, use your skills. It just felt lacking in the survivability department. The Invoker fixes this by utilizing the Ascendancy nodes and utilizing the accessibility to the energy shield on the tree combined with the meditate node on its Ascendancy, but I get to that in a moment. The other issue that the Gemling Legionnaire had, that while it felt really satisfying with the combination of Shattering Palm and Stormwave, and then Tempest Flurry plus Tempest Spell having different setups for bossing and mapping, over a longer period of time it started to be too many buttons. So I went back to the drawing board, I looked at what other people did, I did a lot of testing myself at what thresholds Tempest Flurry started to feel good, and I finally landed on how to utilize it with a reasonable budget of, I think right now I'm looking at like 50 divines worth of gear plus passive tree jewels, and it just nukes everything. Bosses, maps, pinnacle bosses, it feels so satisfying. I was even able to use it on Sanctum runs and doing like 30-minute Sanctum runs. Now I know Temporalis does it way faster, but we're not a spellcaster, we're an attack build. So, what is Tempest Flurry actually doing? So, Tempest Flurry is a skill that has a forced momentum forward, which means it isn't supported by mobility, so it doesn't apply a movement penalty to you. It just is consumed a standing attack, but it has a mobility forward. So whenever you use it, you get set a specific amount of pixels or feet or miles or meters you get moved forward. So if you scale minus movement speed or positive movement speed, you actually don't gain faster moving while using Tempest Flurry. However, Tempest Flurry can be continuously used. It's not considered a channeling skill, it's all their own activations of abilities that cost their own mana and set you their own amount of movement forward. So what is happening instead is that with each use of the skill you just move forward, and by scaling attack speed we suddenly move faster. So the more attack speed you have, the faster you move. So we don't need to invest anything into movement speed and can invest everything into attack speed. And once you have 10 plus attacks per second on your normal attack on Tempest Flurry, it starts to be faster than about 30 to 35% movement speed. And once you're at like 12 to 15 attacks, you're just zooming through the game. 12 attacks is still feasible, it's about what I am at. 15 attacks is on a very high budget level, but once you're there, it feels so satisfying. It is really ridiculous. And it feels quite good. You just move incredibly quickly through your zones. Now, on top of this, automatic movement with using a skill, which is very similar to how we just move and kill in Path of Exile 1, this now also has automated targeting. Every force attack will call down a lightning by using a presenter support 2 lightnings. So these 2 lightnings will hit a nearby enemy. And this means that this nearby enemy hits can be even to the side of us. So we just move forward. Our normal attacks only attack like in a cone in front of us, at least from what I noticed. But those lightnings can hit even to the side. So you just go into a direction where you want to kill stuff and stuff will die. Now this transitions over into our chain Herald setup, or double explosion Herald setup, or however you want to call it. Now, we do mainly lightning damage by using Hand of Wisdom. We scale intelligence, gives us flat lightning damage, we have a lot of lightning damage. Because lightning damage will result in our Tempest Flurry shocking enemies. When the shocked enemies die, we trigger Herald of Thunder. Herald of Thunder will now apply 5 additional lightning calls on our next attack. So if we have 5 enemies in range, we attack, we call 5 down 5 lightnings. These 5 lightnings will do normally just lightning damage. However, what we are doing is we convert our lightning damage cold damage. We gain, this is where the Invoker Ascendancy comes in. We're using I Am the Blizzard to gain 10% of our damage as extra cold damage. Now in PoE2, this damage as extra is 10% of our base damage is now given as cold damage. We then further use 5% with Essence of the Mountain and 25% with Cold Infusion. So now we have 45% of our lightning damage is also cold damage. It does, because of using Cold Infusion, we do less lightning damage with Herald of Thunder, but we don't care about that. We just care about the cold damage. So Herald of Thunder now does cold damage. Then we use Ice Bite, so when we freeze an enemy, it will deal even more cold damage. And we use Glaciation, which means that we now have a better time freezing enemies. Now we want to do this because when we freeze enemies with Herald of Thunder, we then proc Herald of Ice. A frozen enemy that dies will be shattered, which procs Herald of Ice. Now Herald of Ice, because we deal a massive amount of lightning damage with our Hand of Wisdom in action, and further investing into lightning damage, which I Am the Thunder, Lightning Infusion, Enervate, and Conduction, we have a very high chance that our Herald of Ice will cause an explosion that looks like an ice explosion, but it's actually a lightning explosion, deal a ton of lightning damage. This lightning damage will then shock enemies as they die, so they get shocked, they die, and suddenly Herald of Thunder is like, oh wait, I see a shocked enemy is dead. Well, let me buff your next attacks with my Herald of Thunder calls. And then the Herald of Ice explodes, the Herald of Thunder, the lightnings come down, these will freeze again, which will then cause shattering again, which then cause Herald of Ice explosions again, and this chain reaction clears up to off-screen, and entire packs just die with one attack of Tempest Flurry hitting them at any point to just cause this massive chain reaction. It feels really satisfying and really absurd. And we just do enough damage that it works. Now, the only issue is maps with enemy monsters have increased elemental ailment threshold, or enemies have increased elemental ailment threshold. This modifier causes them to have too much ailment threshold to be frozen consistently, which means that we don't see consistent Herald of Ice usage. A Herald of Thunder, we still do enough damage to shock, but we don't do enough damage to freeze in those maps. So keep this in mind when rolling your maps. On very juiced maps, you do not want to use this mod, because then you don't get your double Herald explosion chains going. Why is the Invoker that much more tanky than the Gemling Legionnaire? And the reason is we're going for a live energy shield hybrid layer. And now you could ask, well, why not just do it on a Gemling Legionnaire? The issue is spirit. On a Gemling Legionnaire, we don't have enough spirit. If we want to use Wind Dancer for acrobatic survivability, and Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder, we are ready fully cover all our reservation of spirit. So we need to use the Invoker Ascendancy, Lead Me Through Grace, which rewards us for having our high evasion body armor, which we want to use anyway because we want to use acrobatics. We now gain a lot of spirit from our body armor for free, because this node is an Ascendancy node, we have it anyway, we went for this. It is quotation free, but anyway, I call it free. We gain a lot of spirit. You need only another 115 spirit to reserve everything we want to reserve, because this covers the cost for Herald of Ice, cost for Herald of Thunder, Wind Dancer, Grim Feast, which is the way we gain Energy Shield as a massive survivability layer, and we have permanently active Cast on Shock. We don't need to only use it on single target, we have it during maps as well. Makes it really satisfying, because it helps with the tanky rares, especially when we start pushing into Delirium maps, where we do need that additional single target damage. It is there and we have accessibility to it. But Lead Me Through Grace also gives us the spirit we can use for Grim Feast. And Grim Feast makes Energy Yield from a solid defensive layer to a busted defensive layer. Eventually I want to make a CI version of this build, and I will make an update once I have the next level of investment and CI into this build. But for now I'm a live ES hybrid build, and I have 2.6k ES and 1.8k life. Now this 2.6k energy shield I have gets doubled with Grim Feast, because I can overload it or overcap it to 5.2, leading me to a 7k effective hit pool, which feels incredibly safe. I haven't died since the swap. Nothing has killed me. I feel incredibly tanky. It is feeling really solid. I don't even have Mind Over Matter yet on this build, or Lucidity allocated. I don't need this tiny little bit additional damage for my mana. My mana is just used for dealing raw damage whenever I need it. So we now have a very high energy shield and life, but we also not giving up our evasion. We are using a body armor with as much evasion as possible to get acrobatics into the build, to have a high evasion layer and just evade most attacks. And when the attacks hit, we use a high energy shield helmet to gain a lot of energy shield, and this energy shield then allows us to tank that damage, and then evasion kicks in again, we dodge most hits, then we get hit, our energy shield tanks the hit, we regain energy shield, our evasion tanks, and it just feels incredibly safe. But yeah, that's really all there is to this build. Hit a lot of enemies very quickly with Tempest Flurry, use it for mobility, have Herald Chains to clear the screen after you just hit an enemy, Tempest Spell if needed, and have an incredibly defensive layer with high evasion chest and high energy shield. And this means that the greatest thing about this is we don't need a very overpriced Moria Invictus. We don't need a very expensive, or I guess the Black Sun's Crest is about expensive as the Energy Shield Helm, but the Energy Shield Helm can have a stat modifier on it, and this means we gain survivability and not just stats from the helmet spot, feeling really great. So overall, there's some adjustments to the build, but it feels just way better than Gemling version did, and it's just a really solid build, and I'm having a lot of fun, and it might get nerfed in the future, but I think as long as they don't completely kill it and only slightly nerf the numbers, we're gonna be fine. All this being said, the video has been long enough if it was informational. If you enjoyed this video, I would highly appreciate a thumbs up, and if it allowed you to make your own Invoker stat stacker work and maybe even make it an Autobomber version, I would highly appreciate a subscribe to the channel. Helps me grow, helps me reach more people my content is helpful for. All this said, have a wonderful day, goodbye.